In the name of the living God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. So Lent invites us to be a little more reflective, and our readings today invite us to go back to beginnings. It's all about going back to beginnings. All those readings are about return to where we started from. And so on this Valentine's Day, the invitation is to reflect on what is our first memory of love? When did we sense that we were loved? And it's interesting to kind of go through all the layers of wallpaper and experiences and life's knocks and blows to kind of go back, to be invited to think about that. And for some of us, we can remember being loved as babies and children, being smiled at and washed and diapered, and adoring parents and grandparents, and a kind of idyllic way in which our families supported and loved us. Pure, shining, human-to-human contact. And perhaps our memory of love was an action. It was a memory of a teacher who believed in us when no one else did. And that stayed with us throughout our lives. Or it might be a memory of first love, falling in love. Was it mutual, or was it unrequited? Was our heart broken? A kind of early wounding. And for others among us, love comes later in our lives as a kind of surprise that feelings of intimacy and friendship can be so real and life-affirming, a kind of mature love. And so we have this kind of tension between the commercialization of Valentine's Day. How do we find what love really means as we go back to our beginnings? How do we love God and our neighbor and ourselves that connects us to reality rather than insulating ourselves from love's complexities? And if we're lucky, religion and family and school and society has affirmed the love that is within us, if we're lucky. And sometimes those institutions do not affirm that love, and so we are wounded. And in going back, it is painful. And so this Lenten journey, we are invited not only to go back, but also to repair and heal that which is within us. And we're also invited to remember rightly. There's a Croatian theologian called Miroslav Volf who's written a lot about remembering rightly, which is a very important part of the process of reconciliation. And often our memories are kind of clouded, or we forget things that are important parts of the story. And in a lot of the Bible, there is concern for this amnesia. There is concern that the community does not remember rightly. And so we have in the Bible this constant, remember that you were an Aramean, remember that you were an exile, that you were brought by God through the desert into this land of milk and honey. Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. So the Bible is full of this invitation to remember, and remember rightly. It's almost that the great sin that the Bible points to is the sin of amnesia. We forget. We've forgotten our own journeys. We've forgotten our own beginnings. And so Lent is this wonderful period of deeper reflection where we're invited to remember rightly, to remember our own story and how we got here. And we do that in a culture where the wisdom of the ancestors is no longer valuable. We are in this high-tech, immediate age where memory is not something that we appreciate very much. And yet, if we stumble and we go into our own self-importance, then we hurt, we get hurt, and we hurt other people when we don't remember rightly. The conversation between Satan and Jesus is a parable of this process that goes on within each one of us. The temptation to satisfy the body only through the stone and the loaf. The temptation to see ourselves as the center of the universe. That idea that all of the kingdoms, all authority, it's all about me, will come and worship. And the idea that being taken onto the pinnacle of the temple, throw yourself off. You can do whatever you want. You're invincible. God will take care of you. That these are three very important kind of internal conversations that we have with each other and ourselves every day. And how does Jesus stay centered? How does Jesus deal with the things that we all have to deal with? And for him, it is about going back to his beginnings. He is back in the desert. He is back to where the people travel through and trust God and come into this promised land. He's back to the place of illusion and dreams. And so that is the invitation for us this Lent as well. Deuteronomy, the reading that Bindi shared this morning, means the second law. And it comes as the fifth book in the Bible. And we see Moses, it's really this epic speech by Moses. The whole book is about, it's a way in which Moses is presented in an amazing light. He is dying. He is giving his kind of final testament to his people. He's passing the torch to Joshua. And the people will move into this new phase in their sense of community. They will move into the promised land. So there is nothing quite like Deuteronomy ever. We haven't seen a speech like this up to this point in the Bible, and we don't see a speech like this ever again. And it colors not only Judaism, as David talked about, the whole idea of this covenant, this sacred love relationship, this political pact that God has with humanity is laid out graphically in this speech by Moses. And he goes on and on and on. And it's about not forgetting where you came from. And the way that we're not going to forget where we came from is that there's going to be a liturgical enactment every year. That your God has not only saved you and rescued you from slavery and brought you into this land, but the miracle of you and the earth to produce this amazing fruit of the earth. You are commanded to take the first fruits of the earth and to bring them, to lay them at the altar, and to give thanks to God for that. Now, we might interpret that as, stewardship for paying for the church or the clergy salaries, and it's really not about that. It's about helping us remember where we came from. The idea of the offering of the first fruits, of giving of a portion of your bounty, is about actually preventing amnesia. It's a different way of thinking about how we give back to God and how we share what we have in community. The other part that's remarkable about this story, and again, we forget the covenant is given to a people. There are two phrases that are often used in the Old Testament, that the people become hard-hearted. And the other phrase is the people have stiff necks. They're proud. We can do this alone. Hard-hearted is, and they're both related to the sense of forgetting, of the amnesia that I'm talking about. And what's very interesting in this story is not only are we invited to remember our story by bringing the first fruits of God's goodness, but that the alien is a part of that celebration. Now, it's interesting, there's a kind of swerve. We call this a swerve in Moses because Moses is also concerned about the purity of the race and destroying the enemy and keeping Israel pure from all the false gods of the neighbors. But in this instant, the covenant will also celebrate the presence of the alien in our midst. That's amazing. And it's about the alien is helping us to remember rightly, because by ourselves we will forget where we came from. You think about this in American politics today, right? We talk about the alien as if they were from another planet, when for many of us, we are aliens. I had a card that said resident alien for about 20 years. And for many of you, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, we're talking about our own story. And the idea that the complete story is told by welcoming and celebrating the alien as a part of the celebration, both in terms of liturgy and the sharing of resources, is profound. And what does that mean for us in our country today? And it's a kind of invitation to go back to beginnings, to look at history, to look at how we got here. And if we don't do that, we will get in trouble. That's what the Bible keeps telling us. If you let amnesia take its course, individually and collectively, you're going to get in a mess. And so Moses spends a lot of time reminding people how we stay healthy and how we move together as a community and how we remember where we started. You know, I want to talk a little bit about that whole tension between love and fear. I often had a hard time with the idea that, you know, the Old Testament God was a God to be feared, and the New Testament God was a God to be loved. And so I didn't have to fear God. And I think as I matured more about that, I think the opposite of love is not fear or hate. I think the opposite of love is forgetting and indifference. And it's very easy to kind of forget. And that's why the invitation today is to think about our own journey with love and how that has often become kind of hidden and clouded and damaged. And the invitation is to let that blossom and flourish and be fired again. And maybe the fear, the idea that we fear God, maybe fear is about what happens when we don't fulfill the covenant. What happens when we don't measure up to the promises, the commitment, or the sense of what God is doing in our lives. That is something that we fear. We fear a relationship ending or breaking or not being what we want it to be. And so love and fear are actually connected. I think that's a kind of maturer way of seeing it. And Lent helps us to find our belonging in God and in the love and the generosity of God and the people of God. And we are invited to return to dream and to return to places of beginnings, where love was and is an ever-present reality. That wonderful psalm, to be under the shadow of the Almighty, the wings of the Almighty, that you realize there's something much larger. It may even, still a shadow, but that you are in the presence of something that is profoundly larger and more complicated than we realize. So one of the things that we are invited to do as we journey in Lent, the Episcopal Church has developed this very interesting website. It's called Repairing the Breach. And you can go online. When I sent out my Lenten message, there was a link to it. And it's a kind of daily meditation reflection. There's a little kind of thought for the day and a little prayer. And it's interesting that it begins with the idea of going back to creation. And it says, you know what? God has given us this abundance in creation, and even issues of inequality and social injustice, economic injustice, is about we're disconnected from creation. It goes back to the land again, because the land is abundant. There is enough. But why is it that there isn't enough? And so this is a really, I think, a very helpful way for us on the first Sunday of Lent to go back to beginnings and to think about in your own life, to think about your connection to love and your connection to the earth. I'm going to end with a little reflection. This is a little book by Jim Cotter, who wrote this book. It's called 10 Invitations. It's very short. And he gives this little kind of moment, this little framework for us to reflect. So this is the one for today. Be loyal to the will of the one who draws you by a still small voice. Prepare to listen by clearing your life of noise and clutter. Ask yourself, what is your deepest desire?